Hello everyone, welcome back to Cars and Kelley. So I've talked in the past about some of the upgrades I've done so far or I'm planning to do in the future, but I wanted to talk today about the more mundane maintenance things and replacement parts that I've done for this, and an overview of how much that stuff costs on a car like this. I think it's one of the greatest strengths of the Miata is how cheap and easy to find all the parts are and how easy to work on it is. So I just wanted to give some specifics about how much those parts have cost me to work on so far. So the first expense right after I bought this car about 6 months ago was I wanted to get a couple inspections by some people who really knew what they were doing before I bought it, actually. So I got a pre-purchase inspection from a service that did that. They went to the place where the car was for sale. That was about $100 to go over some general items, give me a sense of what I was getting into. This is before I really knew that much about how to work on cars or what the different parts did. So that just helped me kind of get a sense of what I was getting into before I bought the car. I went to a different mechanic actually after I bought the car just to get another rundown. Got some slightly different results. So that actually spurred me to figure some stuff out on my own to get a clearer sense of what I thought actually needed to be done and what didn't. But yeah, that was the second inspection that I did after. It was about $60. However, that's something I would have done for any car, so I don't really consider that a downside or really specific to buying this car or a Miata. I would have gotten an inspection for any car that I bought. Some more general stuff that you have to do for any car, taxes, registration, stuff like that is going to apply to literally any vehicle you buy, so I'm not going to count that in the expenses right now either. So the first major thing I needed to do when I got the car was actually the tires, and it's not the tires that you see on here right now, these Yokohama S-Drives. When I bought the car, it had some old winter tires on it, which still baffles me why in Northern California, why the previous owner had winter tires on this car. I just went across the street to my local tire shop, and I got the cheapest kind of regular all-season tires I could get. For the time being, to replace on the wheels that the car came with too when I bought it. So that set of tires and lug nuts and everything was around $400 mounted and installed and everything, which is I guess relatively big expense compared to the price of the car, but compared to other vehicles and tires on larger vehicles, or those tires were really not that much. The next unfortunate thing I had to do, which I did know getting into before I bought it, I did know that I was going to have to do this, and it actually let me bargain the price down a little bit, was the windshield replacement. There was a crack in the windshield. It was along the bottom. It was about 6 inches long. I thought there might have been a possibility of repair instead of replacing the windshield. But, the windshield, again, because this car is so small relative to other cars, was not too expensive. The full replacement was about $200, which for a windshield replacement is quite cheap. So I decided to do that instead of messing around with trying to repair the windshield. So I did have to do that. That was one of the costs I knew I was getting into. When I did the windshield, I got new wipers too. That was about $30. Bought some more general stuff for the car. Again, stuff that applies to any car I would have bought, not just this one. Got some cables and chargers for the inside and such, some cleaning supplies to keep in the car. Just general stuff like that. But that's pretty much where the general stuff ends, because after I got the car a little while into ownership, I found some things that I needed to work on that I didn't initially realize that I had to do. The inspection helped me out. The pre-purchase inspection helped me out in figuring out kind of a sense of what I was getting into with the car, like I said, but there were some things that I did not know when I bought that I did have to deal with fairly soon, which was unfortunate. So the first of those unfortunate expenses was the battery. I was starting it one day going to school, and it was starting very slowly. I initially didn't know if it was the starter or the battery, so I went to my local battery store, and they tested it for me, and they said it was running low and it was going to need replacing soon. So I had decided, even if it ended up not being the battery, I needed to get a new battery soon at some point. So I replaced the battery. It's very small in the Miata. You can see it in here. It's a little mini Duracell, and it's in the trunk actually. So that was about $100. Not something I envisioned having to replace, but it did fix the starting issues, and now it starts just fine. Another expense that I didn't exactly see coming, but didn't really turn out to be too much of a hassle to deal with. Actually, let me just pop the hood so you can see what I'm talking about. This car, if you've watched my previous videos, is the special edition, so it came with all the options like air conditioning, cruise control, all the most luxury-oriented features you could have in 2000 on a Miata. So because this does have air conditioning, if you can see under here, there's a belt. One of those accessory belts in there is for the air conditioning pulley on the air conditioning compressor, and that was something I ended up having to replace because my air conditioning was squealing when I turned it on, just briefly, not continuously as I ran the AC, but when I started up the AC initially, pretty much always before I replaced this, it had a little chirping or squealing sound for a couple seconds that was pretty shrill sounding, so I wanted to replace the belt to fix that. I'm really glad that it was only the belt. The belt's about $15 to do. I replaced the other accessory belt while I was at it. Kind of one of the first maintenance jobs I had done on this car. It gave me a sense of what I was doing a little bit, getting around the engine. But really glad it wasn't something bigger like the AC compressor itself, which then I would have had to debate, is it worth spending $300-400 at least to replace the compressor just to have AC, because the car would have functioned just fine without it. But it was just the belt, so that was about $15. Replaced the other belt too while I was at it, so I had brand new accessory belts in the car. While we're over here by the engine bay, there's another thing that I had to replace that I knew pretty much initially right after I bought it, but not before I bought it. But again, did not end up being a big expense, is this radiator. You might have noticed that this looks pretty clean for a 16-year-old car, and that's because I did just replace this radiator recently. It's not, an upgraded metal or aluminum radiator, so it's still, there's no performance benefit over the one that was in here before, but because I don't track the car, because I'm not running extra power, I thought that was fine, and I was able to save money just by buying a cheap replacement radiator. I actually got this on eBay for $50, this radiator. Most, even plastic radiator replacements are around at least $100 from auto parts store, but I was able to find this well-reviewed, very cheap plastic radiator for the Miata for about $50. I replaced that, put some new coolant in it. The old one was leaking, which is why I replaced it. There was a leak coming out of the side, kind of splattering over this paint. It wasn't that bad, but I definitely noticed my coolant level dropping, and so did one of the inspection places that I took this car to. So I just ended up replacing the radiator. And again, these first initial maintenance projects kind of gave me a sense of how to work on the car in the future and where everything is. So it actually didn't end up being that much of a hassle. While I replaced the radiator, I replaced both the radiator hoses. One was about $10, one was about $20. The long one goes from down there to the bottom of the radiator on the bottom right, and the short one just goes from right here on into here, over by the thermostat in the middle of the engine. Neither of them very expensive, and you have to take them off to replace the radiator anyway, so that was fine. Next big maintenance job I did, this is sort of, it was definitely more of an upgrade rather than maintenance because it wasn't necessary, but I'll just mention it briefly here anyway. That's the brakes. I have a whole separate video about my brake upgrade that I did. I replaced the rotors, pads, lines, and fluid, bled the system, all of that. I have a separate video about that. I'll link it below if you want to see it, but I'll just briefly say the parts prices for that, because I don't think I did in the other video. Parts are very cheap, like I keep saying, for the Miata. So these rotors, these brake rotors, they're just plain blank, like Napa Auto Parts rotors, and they were about $20 each. So the whole set of rotors was about $80. The pads, these are Hawk HPS Performance Street pads. The whole set for all four, I believe, was just over $100, maybe about $120. The brake lines, the stainless steel lines I got from 949 Racing were about $100, and then the brake fluid was about $18, some .4 brake fluid. So the total cost, if I recall adding it up right, is about $350, maybe a little more, a little less, give or take. But the whole brake upgrade I did was about $350. But like I said, that is kind of more of an upgrade. There was nothing really wrong with the brakes before. I just wanted some better stopping power, so that was not completely necessary. Something else I've replaced since I've got the car are the floor mats. Again, not really that necessary. I just wanted black floor mats. I liked the kind of contrasting tan and black interior, not just all tan. So these black floor mats are about $50 online. Just kind of give a nice contrast to the inside. So let me talk briefly about the different fluids in this car, because I've pretty much replaced all of them. So the first of which, obviously the biggest, most important, is the engine oil itself. This car has a pretty small engine, as you probably know by now, so it only takes about, I think, 3.5 quarts of oil. Don't quote me on that, but it's not too much. If you get one of those the bigger like 5-quart things of oil, that's definitely enough to fill the car. So this takes 1030, and I put full synthetic in it. This is the specific oil I use right here. This Mobil One high mileage 1030 full synthetic oil. You can debate all day long about different oils, different benefits, but that's just what I ended up using after looking on the forums about what people have had success with, what they've liked. So that's the oil I'm running right now. Coolant, nothing special. Replaced it when I replaced the radiator, filled the system up, just regular standard coolant. Absolutely nothing different for this car. Another fluid I ended up replacing, just because this car is pretty high mileage. When I bought it, it was almost 150,000 miles already, was the transmission fluid, just because I didn't know the last time it had been done. That's actually kind of the case for a lot of this stuff. I did it because I wasn't sure the last time it hadn't been done. So the transmission fluid was fairly cheap. I got this Redline MTL fluid, which was rated very highly in the Miata community. It took 2 bottles of that. I just had to get under the car, loosen the drain and the fill bolts, and just kind of flush the system as if you're doing a regular oil change, but with transmission fluid. And while I had the car jacked up in the air for that, I did the rear differential fluid too, which was similar fluid. It's Redline 75W90 deer oil is what I used for that. Only took 1 bottle of it. Similar process again, just use the drain and the fill bolts and fill it up like that. And here, this is the one I used, Redline 75W90 gear oil for the differential. So those 3 bottles of differential oil and transmission fluid were about, I think, almost actually $45 total for all 3 of those. But you know, those are fluids that you do not have to replace very often, certainly not as often as the regular oil in the car, so that'll last me a while. And then I'm pretty sure the last fluid that I haven't gone over is the power steering fluid right here. This car does have power steering, like I said, all the options from the year. So this is the power steering fluid reservoir right here. I actually replaced it with .4 ATF, automatic transmission fluid, which seemed a little strange, but that's what the manual called for, and that's what everyone online said had worked really well. So I again stuck with the Redline brand that I had heard very good things about, and refilled this little reservoir right here. So the biggest thing I've had to do on this car, and probably one of the last things I'll have to talk about in this video, is the whole timing belt job and all of the other related parts that I replaced when I did that. So like I've said many times now, this car has pretty high mileage, and I was not sure of what maintenance has been done and how recently it had been done. So at first I was hesitant to do the timing belt job. You know, it was a big undertaking for someone who hasn't had a whole lot of experience working on cars, because it's one of the more daunting tasks that you can do, even to a simple car like this. But after a little while of having this car, you know, I really wanted to make sure that this car was running as well as it could, and without knowing when the timing belt and all those other key components had been replaced last, I wasn't feeling as confident as I wanted to be about the condition of this motor. So I decided to undertake that. So it's common when replacing the timing belt on this car to replace a bunch of other stuff as you do it. So this job took me multiple days. It took me way longer than it needed to, probably. But being the first time I'd done any of this, I really wanted to make sure I did it right. So a brief list of the parts that I did replace when I did that job. The timing belt kit itself was about $80, had the belt, the timing belt idler little pulleys that the tensioners that the timing belt goes around, the cam and crankshaft seals, it came with those. So that was about $80. That was the core components of the timing belt job. While I was at it, I did the water pump, which is $40. I did the timing cover gaskets, which is a weird little specific part that I wasn't sure if I needed to, but they were about $30. Some little rubber gaskets, sealings around the timing cover itself. I also did the spark plugs and the spark plug wires. Spark plug wires about $30, spark plugs about $10. I just did that while I was at it, and because you have to take the valve cover off to get to all this stuff, it's one of the first things you have to take off. I did the valve cover gasket as well, and that was about $25. I also had to buy some tools for this job that I didn't have before. To get some torque wrenches. Those aren't specific to this, but I didn't have any torque wrenches yet, so I had to buy those. And then I also bought Flying Miata's special ninja tool that they sell for doing timing belt jobs, which was relatively useful, not as useful as I imagined, but it's a little kind of like a gear shaped, let's see, it's like a little plate that you put in between the gears, the 2 cam gears, to lock them in place as you're taking the belt off and kind of keeping it all lined up. So that was fairly useful for keeping that straight. Pretty sure those are all the parts that I replaced while I was down there. Total is about $250. That was far less than it would have cost to get a shop to do the timing belt job. And I did, even though it was a lot of work and took a lot of time, I did actually end up getting everything back together, and it ran well after. So glad that all went well, because that definitely was the biggest undertaking, biggest maintenance job that I had done on this car so far, and gives me some confidence about doing some more work in the future. Some other recent things I replaced. I did the motor mounts, actually. I first replaced the motor mounts with OEM Mazda stock ones, which were about $70, because one of the old motor mounts was actually broken, and this is another thing I didn't know when I got the car. The car was still drivable for sure, but the motor was moving more than it should, more than it needed to. So I replaced them first with stock OEM Mazda mounts, like I said. Not the easiest job, not as hard as people make it out to be. You just have to kind of lift the engine up independently of the car so you can unbolt the 2 mounts. But the reason I actually ended up doing the motor mount jobs again with Mazda competition mounts, which are stiffer, because when I replaced it with the OEM with the stock mounts, it didn't actually really improve the motor moving or the shaking at all. It still moved around a lot, seemingly more than it should. Even though I know the stock Mazda mounts are pretty soft, it still seemed like it should not have moved that much. But anyhow, I didn't know what else to do besides just replace the mounts again with stiffer ones, so I got the competition mounts, and it is better now. So the driving of it is not drastically different, but you can see that the motor is shaking less, which is good for efficiency and getting power down and throttle response and all of that. A couple other small things I've done recently, and I think this will be the last few things. These door bushings right here are actually Garage Star's Delrin door bushings. I got them on sale when I went to a Miata event, and Garage Star was there as part of the event. I got them for about $30. The stock door bushings are soft. They're kind of like gummy bears, and so when the door closes, it's kind of soft, not as tight and hard of a seal as it could be. So these are, as you can see, pretty rock hard. And so they hold the door in place a lot better, and they just kind of add a little bit of a feeling of stiffness for the car for very cheap. It's only about $30. And then the last expense I've done so far is I actually deconstructed the door. I took the door apart so I could clean and re-grease the window tracks for these power windows. Because this car is old and high mileage, the windows were pretty slow, kind of sticky sometimes, and I didn't want to continue using them like that for that long because that wears down the motor. And replacing the power window motor itself is not cheap. That's like $200 per side, so I really wanted to avoid that if possible. So I took the door apart, and it was kind of involved for what it is, for the result, which is just faster windows now, but definitely worth it. Cleaned all the tracks that the power windows go in and lubed them with Shin Etsu grease, Honda brand grease, fun fact, but works really well for cleaning up that system and making the windows a lot smoother, a lot faster. Pretty sure that's all the maintenance I've done to this car so far. I'm not going to give a total, not going to add it all up just because some of it hasn't been necessary. Some of it has been stuff that I just wanted to do or stuff I did for reassurance, not that necessarily had to be done. So I'm not going to give a total because it can vary a lot depending on, how much you actually judge as necessary maintenance. But overall, it is definitely fair to say that this car is pretty cheap to work on. Very cheap, actually, respectively to other cars. Some of these parts may sound kind of expensive, but if you compare them to pretty much any other car or newer car or bigger car, it is going to be more expensive. So that's one of the reasons I got this car, is because it's so cheap and so small and so easy to learn how to work on. So it's definitely been a great project so far. Anyway, I hope this video hasn't dragged on for too long. I just wanted to give some specifics about part costs for any potential Miata owners that were wondering really how much does it actually cost to do some of these basic maintenance jobs. I hope this helped with that. And as always, this has been Cars and Kelley. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next video.